Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan read the paper. It's Sunday, February 2nd, Groundhog Day. Happy birthday, Steed. There's a lot of controversy about whether the groundhog saw his shadow today. Yeah. Around here, he couldn't possibly see his shadow. It's a gloomy, super gloomy day. So we have high hopes for an early spring, right?
No, I don't. I never understood Groundhog Day. How does it work again?
If the groundhog
sees his
shadow and he runs back in his hole.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
And then we have, 9 more months of winter or something. But if not, if he doesn't see his shadow, because there is no sun, for some reason, we'll have an early spring.
Well, I know. I read recently that the rate on that in terms of correctness is 40%. So, whatever.
That's not what it's about, Daniel.
Okay.
It's superstition. Just roll with it.
You know, I also read that there are some people who do it with a fake groundhog, a stuffed groundhog. And they asked Bill Murray how he feels about that. Bill Murray, of course, the star of Groundhog Day. And he said he doesn't like it. It takes the thing out of the groundhog's hands. So
to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, there's lots of great groundhog stories, including one where the groundhog actually bites de Blasio.
Oh, well, that's true, too.
And then de Blasio gets in trouble for mistreating the groundhog.
We can't be doing de Blasio stories.
Right.
That won't get us. Because we had a busy week. And it started on Tuesday, where you and I, Tamsen Granger, and Dan Abuhoff went to the Metropolitan Opera to see Porgy and Bess.
Well, this was actually a gift to you.
Right.
In kind of honor of your retirement.
Right.
From
Mike Schaefer. And
his wife,
so it's
Kate.
Super nice. Yeah. And there we were at the Met. And I realized, I hadn't thought about it, I've never been to the Metropolitan Opera before. Right. Have you?
I don't think so. We've been to the movie theater broadcasting the Met.
Right.
We haven't been in the actual...
And we've been to the City Opera, which is an opera building right next door. But we haven't been in the Met before. And it's glorious and all that. It's really something.
I mean, first of all, they took us to dinner. It was a very nice dinner.
Yes, right.
And then into the opera, we got to go in the side entrance with them.
Because they're big time.
They are subscribers.
Right.
So just like Degas got to go into the side entrance of the Paris Opera, there we were.
Yeah. So we're in the Met Opera, and it's the Opera House, and it's Porgy and Bess. And we'll get to Porgy and Bess in just a second, but just in terms of opera, we go to a fair number of Broadway shows and Broadway musicals, and the curtain opens and they start the performance, they start the singing, and it's glorious singing, and you and I have the same reaction, which is, what happened to the volume? Someone's got to turn the volume up. You can hardly hear these people.
The microphones are not working.
And it turns out, when you think about it, they don't have microphones. Because it's the Met, it's opera. And the point is that the folks are supposed to have these glorious voices. You're supposed to be able to hear them well unamplified in all their subtle sound. And so you can fully appreciate what's going on. And it takes a little getting used to.
Yes.
Right? At the beginning, you keep saying, I can hardly hear these people. But you do adjust, right? I adjusted.
You do adjust. You adjust your expectations.
Yeah. And
you adjust what you're listening for. And it begins to work. But here's a fun thing, though.
Yeah, what?
The opposite aspect of that is that in front, on the back of every seat is a projection of subtitles.
Right, so you
can understand
the words.
The words. Now, maybe that's not so important for everybody since it was in English.
Yeah.
But I actually found it very helpful.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand every word being sung.
Well,
it's to some extent it's in opera speak.
Well, there's a reason for that, and let me come back to that in a moment. I understand a lot of people had pressed that button and were following that, and certainly it's a big advantage when you're listening to an Italian opera to see the words because you have the translation. But yes, it made it clear in terms of what was being said here, and part of that was amplification, but part of that was dialect. So let's talk a little bit about what Porgy and Bess is. And there was, I thought there was a pretty good summary of Porgy and Bess in the program that we were provided, and it sort of summarized it better than I could, if I can find it. Yes, here's the way the folks at the Met describe it. Porgy and Bess is a supremely American operatic masterpiece and the most ambitious work by one of the nation's greatest musical talents. Porgy and Bess focuses on the joys and struggles of a black neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina in the early 20th century. The opera's score features a rich cache of individual solos, but the true core of the story is in its depiction of a remarkable community. Many of the memorable supporting characters have important musical and dramatic functions within the opera, and the chorus maintains a central role throughout. In spite of the marginalization of Catfish Row, the community has a profound understanding of the seasonal cycles of life and death, sometimes expressed in superstition, sometimes in sincere faith, and sometimes in nonsense syllables and choral vocal size, as if saying, "This is too deep for words." And of course, it is a masterwork by George Gershwin. As they summarize it, the overall combination of music, word, and idea among a complex blend of Americana make this a unique and impressive work both within and beyond the operatic repertory. Look, Porgy and Bess was number one, groundbreaking, in the 1930s because there wasn't anything in American opera. George Gershwin was writing popular music and suddenly said, "I'm writing an opera." And there was a great debate, was this an opera or was it something that was more of a musical? And it's a very ambitious story, besides, which has become over time controversial. It's basically the story of this community, as just described, in Catfish Row in Charleston, South Carolina, which is a poor community. It's uneducated people. They're religious. They're superstitious. They don't triumph necessarily over all that's thrown in front of them. It's a sad story. And people have strong reactions to it. It's written...
it's based on...
Oh, go ahead.
A play written by DuBose Hayward.
Right.
And the play was very successful. And that's, of course, based on a novel that he wrote called Porgy.
Right.
About these people. And he's from this area. And he was white.
Right.
And he wrote this also with his wife, Dorothy. And the novel was written in 1925. So that's nearly 100 years ago. And the play was quite successful. Ran over 300 performances in New York City.
Yeah, did you know Dorothy went to Harvard?
Dorothy went to Harvard?
Yeah. Yeah. And anyway.
Dorothy went to Harvard?
Yes.
His wife went to Harvard?
Yes.
How is that possible? As a graduate student?
Yeah, look, that's what I read. In any event, so they write it.
Harvard was male at that time.
I'm telling you, she went to Harvard. We'll look it up later. In any event, George Gershwin looks at this property and he wants to make it into an opera. And he persuades the Haywards that that's what should happen. And he goes and spends some time in South Carolina in order to make this into his masterwork. And it comes out in 1935.
Right. Well, he had aspirations, in terms of writing classical music.
Yeah.
I mean, he was, not just, this was not a one-off for him.
But it stands apart from a lot of his other work. I mean.
Oh, absolutely. And so we had we had talked about this production, which was aspiring to present the work in its entirety. There have been many other productions that have kind of, what would you call it, abridged productions for, aiming at a more popular audience, more popular taste-oriented audience, etc. So it was indeed, I would say, ambitious. We should mention some of the leads. Porgy was played by Eric Owens. Bess played by Angel Blue. And there are a lot of great voices. So what'd you think?
I liked it. Let me mention one final thing. I mean, in the intro, the Met text mentioned that it uses dialect. And what that is the Gullah dialect. Apparently it's a particular dialect that combines Creole, and there was a particular population called the Gullah that was from the Low Country in the South. Folks descended from freed slaves, and was an identified population, and they had their own way of speaking. So it's a lot of colloquialism, and they speak in ways that sometimes are a little bit odd, and frankly are very hard to hear in 2020, if that's where we are now. But that's clearly part of it, and in fact, Dubose Hayward was sort of particularly interested in the Gullah dialect. So in the first text they put together, it did incorporate a lot of that dialect, and there was talk about George Gershwin attending church services where they used that dialect, and he tried to incorporate it in the music. I'm going to come back to that later. So it sounds a little odd in some ways. I liked it. I mean, it's the great masterwork. You can't ignore it. It's one of the great masterworks in American music. It is what it is. I'm not used to opera. It's a different thing for me. But it kind of, you recognize the popular songs, but that's not enough to make a great impression. It sort of washes over you. It's musical all the way through. It's this great tragic story. It takes its time. It's 3.5 hours. But I enjoyed it a great deal. What did you think? I
enjoyed it. And you're right. It took a while to adjust.
Right.
To the lack of amplification and the dialect and even the subject matter.
Right.
Okay. We're kind of dancing around this. Did you really like it because you liked it or because it's supposed to be great?
No, American? I like it. So here's what it is, the way I think about it. I did enjoy it. I mean, whether it's the kind of thing I would do every day is something else. But I'm not an opera goer. I'm not really oriented that way. There's clearly some adjustments required, but it is sort of a half step to an opera because it incorporates 4 or 5 popular songs that we all know. It ain't necessarily so. Bess, You Was My Woman Now, Summertime. There are songs in there. So if you're used to going to Broadway shows, you have your hits, if you will. And right. It's easier to connect to it than you would in an opera in which you're just saying, I'm hearing some music. I don't know what's the beginning of one aria and what's the end of another. I can't tell. Here you clearly can tell. So it's sort of an entree in. Did I go from 0 to 60 and I am an opera lover? No. But it was, to me, a useful bridge for that.
Now, critics have said this is a terribly negative, caricaturish view of Black culture and stories. So where do you stand on that?
Well, look, some critics, I mean, Dubose Hayward's writing what he's seeing. And he did study the Gullah dialect. He's trying to get that as precisely as he can. It's not an offhand attempt based on rumor about what things are like in the South. The man lived in South Carolina. George Gershwin went to South Carolina. So it represents their best effort to reflect what they're seeing there and to tell a story that they think ultimately is sympathetic to the population down there. They're not out there to be critical of the population down there. So to me, it's very hard to criticize. This is a surprise that it's grating to hear that dialect, to hear characters speak that way in such an uneducated, you want to call it ignorant way in 2020. Yeah, it's grating, but that's the way they heard it.
Right. Okay. It's not just the dialect, Daniel. It's a negative story.
It's a story.
It's a sad story.
It's a story.
And one could look at it and say it presents Black people as drug addicts, alcoholics, troubled people.
Well, I have 2 answers to that. First of all, that's just 3 of the characters. 90% of the people are very religious, very industrious, very much trying to support others in the community. That's all positive. The folks you're talking about, they're the main characters, but they're outliers. And secondly, it's a story. It's a story. I mean, those are the characters they're focusing on. You can have a story that takes place any time in history. It's often negative. I mean, if you go back to other operas, La Boheme or something like that, there's stories about tough times. That's what people point out. That's what people get excited about.
It's larger than life,
right?
Passions and not always, true to life, true to everyday life situations and denouements. There were a lot of people were getting killed.
No, listen, no one
random situations.
But no one's going to. Who's buying a ticket to say, "Here's a happy family," and they fit well in the minivan, and everything was cool. That's not high drama. I mean, you're writing about something that has a certain impact.
Right.
So that doesn't trouble me.
And to help us out, we did. You are familiar with Sondheim's view of the lyrics. Now, George wrote the music.
Right, George
Gershwin.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And his brother Ira did some of the lyrics, but DuBose Hayward did a lot of the great lyrics.
In Sondheim's view.
Sondheim's known for saying, those are pretty great.
Well, here's the thing. First of all, Sondheim has views on what lyrics are good and what lyrics are bad. To him, the simplest lyrics are the best. And
the most evocative of human emotion.
Right. And he's very critical of his own lyrics. And I was telling you before, he's, even in West Side Story, he's critical of a lot of his own lyrics, like from I Feel Pretty. He thinks they feel contrived. They're not the simplest lyrics. To him, the great lyrics, therefore, in this show are Bess, You Is My Woman Now. The very simple lyric, it fits into the music, and that's great lyric writing. Those lyrics are written by DuBose Hayward, who was a poet. He was not a lyricist. He never wrote another lyric besides this. But this is what Sondheim responds to. By contrast, a lot of the other lyrics, and people are very familiar with, Sporting Life and Ain't Necessarily So, Methuselah lived 900 years, and it goes on to call that living. It's a very complicated lyric. People know that lyric, but Sondheim's dismissive of that. To him, that's not great lyric writing. And so he very much supports the DuBose Hayward lyrics, which he thinks are great.
Well, the song that stuck out for me, actually, was My Man's Gone Now.
Okay.
And that's a woman singing about her husband. It's fairly early on. A minor character.
Woman gets washed away.
No. That's a different.
Oh, okay.
There's that whole funeral scene.
Oh, okay.
And that was tremendously moving. Anyway, we should go on. We're really lavishing a lot of attention on this.
If you get the opportunity to go.
It was a big night. Go. It was a glorious
night. And certainly worth going. And again, an entree into the opera for those who are uninitiated, like you and I, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So great way to
baby
get into
step.
Baby step.
That's our second baby step. Our first baby step was when we went to the Met Opera live.
Yeah.
At the movie theater.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
And so now we've been to the Met Opera House.
Who knows what's next?
So here's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
We saw a musical. We saw a play. Both of them were largely black productions.
Well, let me just build on that in a second. The play is
a soldier's play,
right?
Written by Charles Fuller.
Right.
This is a revival done by the Roundabout Theater Company, and it actually, the original was from 1981.
Right.
All right, and so this is a revival, and as I was saying, the majority of the cast is black.
Yeah.
In this case, the playwright was black.
Charles Fuller, sure.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, and well, there's even more than that. Let me give you another connection that may seem odd, but I want to make this point. I seem to be focusing on this Gullah dialect. If you look up Gullah dialect in Wikipedia, and they go to works of art that use the Gullah dialect, the two things they mentioned first were Porgy and Bess and A Soldier's Play. And
because of the one character.
Exactly. And there's not too much theater about that or movies about that. But let's go to the story. The basic story of A Soldier's Play is this. There is an army outfit in Louisiana. It's an all-black outfit. And this is during World War II. It's 1943 or 1944. And the black soldiers aren't sent overseas. They're not seen fit to fight in that way. But there are other things for people to do in the U.S. Army, in the U.S., although they're not the most exciting stuff. In this case, a lot of these guys play ball. They're like the best baseball team in the area, and they take some great pride in that. But they do a lot of Army drudge work besides. And the story is ultimately the story of a murder, a killing that takes place on the site, and someone's brought down to solve the murder from outside, and he is a captain, which is interesting because the black soldiers tend to be non-commissioned officers, NCOs, and yet this captain comes down who is black, who's equal in command to the captain who's been taking charge of these soldiers before, the white captain. And now he's asserting his authority, and there's some dynamic between the two of them, and it's up to the captain that comes down, the character's name is Davenport, to solve the murder. And that's, in fact, what he does. But so what you have is two things going on. You have what's described as a procedural. You have a Law and Order episode, but an excellent Law and Order episode, a super Law and Order episode.
So it's a murder mystery.
Right, before the advent of Law and Order, by the way. And at the same time, but you have these characters dealing with each other and the white officer in a very frank way about what it means to be a black soldier in the U.S. Army in 1944. So it's very much about race.
Well, yes. It's a picture of the segregated military culture of the time. And so that's quite interesting, horrifying, etc. And listen, I think this is a great production. Mm-hmm. The review that I saw in the New York Times was a little bit lukewarm. I think that's wrong. I think this is, I was interested the whole time. I enjoyed the procedural aspect, solving of the murder. And I think the people were good.
Yeah.
I think
David Allen Grier and Blair Underwood.
Blair Underwood, who plays the black captain.
Davenport.
Was fantastic, I thought. And it's a no-brainer for him, I guess.
Yeah.
Not because he was in L.A. law, but there was a great little article in the New York Times, an interview with him and his father, who was career military.
Right.
And Blair Underwood actually lived on Army bases. And they asked him, what kind of preparation did he do for this? He said he didn't need much. He, lived with this, not the discrimination, the segregated atmosphere, but understanding, the military interactions, how an officer carries himself, how people salute, the language of the salute, etc.
Right.
And I will say he seemed to convey that.
Yeah, I think so. And that was a nice article. And the father says, in fact, he thought the depiction of race relations in the play was accurate. He was living that by being in the Army during that period of time. Yeah, the father was. What at the times I thought was unfair in one way, although I think there's a criticism still, or at least a difficulty. But here, I think the Times was basically saying we didn't like this production as much as the original production. Whether that's important or fair, I don't know. But the original production again was in 1981. It was done by the Negro Ensemble Company. It was off Broadway. It had in it Denzel Washington. It had in it Samuel Jackson. They were just soldiers in this. And it starred a fellow named Adolph Caesar. And I remember at the time reading about it. I was familiar with the play when it opened and it became a movie. And Caesar's performance was considered a tour de force. At the time.
What part did he play?
He played...
Did he play Davenport?
No, David Allen Grier. He played the fellow at the center of the controversy. He was bitter, he had bile. It was a powerful performance. He was unknown before this. He became known because of this, at least for a short period of time. So it's very hard to match up to that performance. And I think it's sort of unfair to say at the Times that David Allen Grier doesn't have quite the depth.
They say he's miscast.
Yeah. He's nothing like it.
He was in the original production.
But that's a regular soldier.
In a different part.
Right.
But he's familiar with the material.
Right.
And he is, his interpretation is rather different.
Sure.
But I can see it.
Look, other reviews liked him fine. But that was the Times. But here's to me is a little bit of a difficulty, although bottom line, I'm with you. I like it and I would recommend it. You have on the one hand this, as we described it, a procedural, this murder mystery, if you will, that's being worked through. And you have, on the other hand, this issue of race that's being dealt with in a very graphic way, in the way that people are dealing with each other in a very harsh way, actually. And the question is, how do those two things resolve themselves in a way that dovetails? Can you do that? It's easy to resolve the procedural. You find the murder, and that's what this does. Right. But how does the race issue resolve itself in a way that resonates? And that's the problem, because that's still there. That's still hanging. There's no closure on that. And the way what they used to do that, the traditional way of doing that at that period of time in 1981 was to have the black lead and the white lead shake hands and appreciate each other in the heat of the night. Okay, that's the way that gets resolved. Sidney Poitier, and Rod Steiger shake hands, and Rod Steiger says, "Well, I guess you're okay," which was directed by the same person, by the way, who directed Soldier's Play in the movies in the early 80s. But that's the way that was done. That was considered a resolution, and that happens in this play, and that's unsatisfactory in 2020. So that doesn't resonate. The other line that's supposed to sort of bring everything together is interesting. At the end of the play, and I'm not giving anything away, the Davenport says to the white captain with whom he's dealing, "Get used to black people being in charge." Now, why is that an important line? Apparently, that was in the original play, and it was that was considered highly controversial. So much so, according to Charles Fuller, that's the reason the play never went to Broadway. Because it ended with "get used," and he refused to take the line out. Okay. So now that's the button at the end of the play. Literally the last line. Davenport says to his white counterpart, "Get used to black people in charge." But in 2020, that's nothing. That's nothing. So it just doesn't have that clincher, doesn't end. So it's difficult. I don't know how to do it. So I think that's a little bit of it's built into the play. It's kind of difficult. But I do think I recommend it. I think it's worth seeing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really thought it was a terrific night of theater.
Yeah.
Then...
This is quite a week. Then we went out last night to the McCarter Theater.
In beautiful downtown Princeton, New Jersey.
And we saw...
a comedian.
Well, we saw Andy Borowitz do stand-up comedy. Andy Borowitz, who's the author of the Borowitz Report, which a lot of people are familiar with, which runs in The New Yorker.
Right.
And has for years, which is a satirical piece that, comments on what's going on in the news and in a... Well,
it's not just a piece. It's his ongoing column.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And let me just read some headlines from the Borowitz report, from various Borowitz reports. A recent one was called, and this is all under the heading, Not the News. Right. Here's a headline: El Chapo outraged that his trial included witnesses. Mm-hmm. And then the kind of subtitle is, if someone had told me you could have a witness-free trial, that's the route I would have gone for sure. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then another one was titled, Trump says he has no intention of having Bolton's book read aloud to him. The president said he hears many books a week, but this was the last one he'd want Ivanka to read to him. And then another one, Trump defense team scrambling to find example of law Trump did not break. So far, no luck, a source close to the defense team said.
Yeah, so he's been writing this for 20 years.
Okay, so that gives you a kind of a picture of what kind of political humor is going on here. And
he took up stand-up comedy about 10 or 15 years ago. And he literally took, it's not like he does one or two appearances. He does a lot of appearances every year, and he has a routine, which he works up and works on. And so it's a different aspect of what he does.
Let me just say that one of the reasons we went to this was that you know his brother.
Sure.
Peter Borowitz.
Yeah.
And so,
and I've met Andy.
Okay.
I met Andy.
And I was curious what this would be like.
Yeah, and I think, and I've seen Andy perform before, and I think Andy's funny. I think Andy's a funny guy.
And not all of it was political.
Yeah.
But most of it was political. Yeah. And, there were little vignettes, pictures of, his father.
Right. When I say Andy's funny, there was certain, he talked a little about growing up in Shaker Heights and, in Ohio, near Cleveland, really funny stuff. And a lot of other things.
Yes, one of the great lines was he grew up, essentially his family were drive-by Jews.
Yes. Right, because, he had, his parents didn't go to temple, but he had to be educated.
But he had to go to temple.
So they would drop him off and push him out of the car, and then they would hardly stop the car and keep going. That's the way they did it. And he talked about when Yom Kippur going to smorgasbord instead of fasting. I mean, he had funny stories.
But at the end, there was a question and answer session. Yeah. And he was very good on his feet.
He was good. I didn't love the question and answer session. The thing was this. Political's fine. And a lot of the political humor can be very funny. And some of the pieces you just mentioned were obviously funny. You can see how someone could build on that and have something like that even in a stand-up performance. The problem with this, and I'll just say right now, I thought it was good, but only okay. I thought he had a lot of funny stuff and a lot of really lazy, not funny stuff. And here's what I mean by that. And you're going to disagree, but that's good. I mean, he started, and in the first 5 minutes, almost 10 minutes, solid was, he just got out in front of an audience in Princeton, New Jersey, which is all liberal, and he said, "Boy, Donald Trump, what a turd." And he did variations on that theme for about 6 or 7 minutes, and people were cheering and laughing and so on. And in my mind, that's juvenile. That's nothing. I mean, you could put a bunch of like-minded people together, and you can have the lowest common denominator say, "What a jerk that guy is," and everybody breaks into cheering. That's what that was.
Right.
That's what it was for 7 or 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
And that, I'm saying to myself, how lazy can you possibly be? How can you get up in front of 300 people and say, "This is my material"? Later on, his material was good, but it was that. And he would every once in a while, he came back to it. To me, that's hard to excuse.
No, I don't think it's hard to excuse.
Okay.
I think it's what you pray for as a comedian.
Maybe.
Right? I'm not a comedian.
Yeah.
Okay, but I am sometimes in a situation of speaking to a group.
Yeah.
And, trying to get a laugh.
Right.
And in that situation, you pray for the homogeneous group.
Right.
Okay? That you can just say a particular word with a particular tone of voice, and people laugh like crazy.
Right.
All right? That's manna from heaven. That's a gift from God.
You know what the key is?
And, that is how you get the ball rolling.
You know what? You know what the difference is? You're not a comedian. I don't mean by that you're not funny, because you are as funny as Andy Borowitz. But what I mean by that is you're not charging money. And if you're going to get in front of people and say, "Look at that, what a jerk," you can't do that for 5 or 10 minutes. Just can't do it. I mean, but there's another element to it that I find disturbing, because, and this is why I didn't like the closing. It's this group of like-minded people. I'm no Trump fan, but you have this group of incredibly like-minded people who are just, cheering or booing at anything with a mention of Trump. And at one point, Borowitz even says, the problem isn't even Trump. The problem is the people who voted for Trump. I have no problem with elitism. Everyone in the audience I understand is elite, but the people who voted for Trump, they're uneducated. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he's saying. And then he tried to make a joke of it
that's not my favorite.
Let me finish. That really failed entirely. So that's what he's saying. And people are cheering. That's right. It's the great unwashed behind Trump. And I'm saying to myself, is that the way these people look at the world? That's what they've learned.
Okay.
Let me finish. That's what they've learned since the election. They think Trump was elected because the great unwashed who didn't have an education voted him in, and all will be right in the world a year from now. You know something? That's a lot. That's hard to take. And I'm saying to myself,
that's hard to take because that is an uneducated, unsophisticated view.
In my mind, it is. That's right.
Yes. Okay.
And so
you got me there.
It was off-putting in that respect. So I do not give it 5 stars.
Okay.
Okay.
But meanwhile, so here's the funny thing. So we went to Princeton.
Yeah.
and we went to the little ramen place.
Yes.
To grab a bite.
As one does.
Before we go down.
As one does.
And so we're either going to or from the ramen place, and behind the Nassau Inn, we see a tiny group of people ice skating.
Skating rink. From out of nowhere.
How is there a skating rink
in the middle of Princeton?
And it's actually about 48 degrees.
Right, and it's a skating rink.
And we keep going.
And this is not Rockefeller Center. Someone built a skating rink in Princeton?
We keep going.
How could that be?
And then...
we open the paper today.
And there's an article called, in the New York Times, with the headline, "Ditch the Zamboni, this ice doesn't need it." With stackable plastic panels, a company called Glice wants to build rinks for a warming world. And you said, Tamsen, this must be what we saw. And I Googled it, and you were right.
It's unbelievable. Is this a development or what? This is a synthetic ice. It comes in all these stackable panels.
Plastic interlocking.
Right. The truck brings it by, you put it on the ground, and you can skate on it. It's unreal. And the maintenance is, all you do is you power wash it the next morning, and there you go. And it lasts 10 or 12 years, and you know what you do when it doesn't work anymore because it's worn down? You turn it over. You flip it over. I mean, this is...
and use the other side
this
for
is
10
like,
years.
This is the biggest thing since Easy Pass. I mean, I can't believe this. And they're talking about these rinks being created and installed now in all kinds of exotic places with warm climates.
There's one in Mexico City.
Yeah. And the expense. I mean, and if you compare the expense compared to a real rink in something like this, it's like night and day. This costs like nothing compared to real rink.
Okay, so here's the deal.
Yeah.
Our beloved Lasker rink in Central Park
right.
needs renovation.
Right. Costs millions of dollars.
And the Central Park Conservancy announced in the fall it was going to be spending $110 million
right.
to fix up the Lasker rink, which is actually kind of two giant rinks put together.
Right.
All right. So this is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay. So how much does something comparable in the Glice cost?
Yeah.
I did the math.
Oh, and how much is it?
And for the same amount of square footage, it would be $1 million
versus
to install the Glice.
Versus $150 million. Right.
Versus about 110.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
And they would last, as you know, 10 or 12
and
years.
It'll be easy to maintain.
Them over.
Let me make 2 points to that, consistent with what you're saying. First of all, if they say it's 110, it's going to be 210. If they say it's going to take a year, it's going to take 3 years. And this doesn't even get to the cost of maintenance. And you want to know something? They'll do it anyway. So they'll spend all the money, they'll take all the time, and they won't look into this Glice alternative. I mean, clearly the handwriting's on the wall. But I mean, this is such an amazing development, and they say it's really good.
Right. It was more or less developed by a Spanish ice hockey player.
Yes.
Okay. And it, went from there. And the company is actually in Lucerne, in Switzerland.
All right.
We don't have time.
We look forward to seeing more like this.
Here's the only thing I want to say.
Yeah.
I don't like the pronunciation.
How would you pronounce it?
I think it would be more fun to say Glice.
Sure.
But Glice is another thing. It's an art term as well. So.
I mean, this is amazing. You could put an ice rink in your backyard. I mean, this is crazy. So we're going to see
But people are doing that.
Are they?
Yeah, you can buy it. It's not that expensive. You can buy a small one for like $1,200. And again, you'll have it forever.
Wow.
And it's easy to take care of.
All right, that's what we're doing. So how can you possibly match that story? You're saying, here's a story about a floor covering, which is just revolutionary. You can't possibly match it. And yet, there's an article in the Times this week called Bricks Alive. Scientists create living concrete. That's literally what it says. And the explanation is a little bit thin, so I'm not going to be able to explain it because the information is just not there. But apparently, they have developed a concrete that includes certain bacteria in it. And because the bacteria is in it, they felt if they could find a way to maintain the bacteria over time, in other words, to have the bacteria stay in the concrete but continue to be alive, they might reap wonderful benefits. And the way they came up with doing that is by adding Knox gelatin to the mixture. They literally went to the supermarket and bought Jell-O and added it to the mixture of concrete with the bacteria. And now they say they have developed living concrete, which they call concrete with this living organism in it. And what does that mean? Two things come to mind. I'm not making this up. Two things come to mind. Number one, since it's alive, over time, as concrete cracks, the living concrete will fix the cracks. It won't be cracked. The second is that because it's living, it can grow. So they can ship the concrete blocks, or one concrete block, to Costa Rica, let's say, break it in half, and they can generate 3 or 4 or 5 concrete blocks. It will grow from the broken concrete block. So rather than having to ship 7 blocks, they only ship 2, and they regenerate the concrete blocks at the destination, which is an amazing thing if they can do it.
Well, that's going to be really handy when we settle Mars.
Yeah, great. Yes, settling Mars. This will be the key. And there'll be ice skating on Mars because there'll be Glice.
Okay, so we'll just see. That's going to take a while.
Yeah.
To develop. It's interesting. But, the Romans changed the world with the development of concrete.
Well,
this could be the next big thing.
It's amazing.
All right. Speaking of big things, Wall Street Journal has a big article on umami and the history of umami. Mm-hmm. And you know what umami is, right?
Yeah, you told me.
And? You haven't absorbed it.
Nice.
It's basically known as the fifth taste.
Mm.
We have sweet.
Yeah.
And salty.
Yeah.
And bitter.
Mm-hmm.
And sour.
Right.
And umami.
Okay.
Which is described as sort of meaty or savory flavor. It's what makes things taste good.
Okay, listen.
Basically, it was discovered or identified by a Japanese chemist in 1908. Okay. And he figures out that an amino acid, basically glutamate, is responsible for making things tasty. All right. And that becomes isolated in a product called MSG by the 1930s. And that becomes tremendously popular in terms of making things taste good. Then in 1968, there's a letter in the New England Journal of Medicine that posits that MSG is responsible for all kinds of bad things. Headaches, numbness, palpitations, weakness, etc. It's never scientifically substantiated.
Yeah, I think that's been debunked, right?
But nonetheless, it sets off this huge reaction against MSG.
Right.
And, and you remember those days, right? You go into a restaurant and they say, no, don't worry. We don't have MSG in any of our Chinese food.
But didn't I read it was recently debunked, or am I wrong about that?
Well, I
think it is.
I don't know if it was so much debunked as people said, wait a minute, there is no scientific proof.
I'll call that debunked.
For that
so
assumption.
MSG has been...
it required a lot of marketing, especially by the Glutamate Association.
Oh, yes. They're on top of
rehabilitating the image. And okay, so what is umami and what is it in? Mm-hmm. Okay. And it's in seafood. It's in bacon. It's in tomatoes. It's in mushrooms, especially dried shiitake mushrooms. It's in anchovies. It's in sardines. And you add any of these things to what you're cooking, and that makes it taste better. Okay, so much of what we love to eat, anything with Parmesan cheese, aged Parmesan cheese, is loaded with it.
Okay.
And you can make what you're cooking much better, much tastier. I mean, it's finally a word that's in the dictionary. I mean, we've been hearing about it for a long, long time. Finally, it's sort of becoming a part of everyday
mainstream.
Okay.
Good.
And so, I would just say, throw some fish sauce in your pasta sauce, in your marinara sauce, is what cool kids are doing. Yeah. And it adds this earthiness. It adds another layer. Yeah. Now, there's a lot of talk that the Japanese use the concept very subtly with kombu, with seaweed, etc. And it's Americans who are kind of trying to punch you in the face with a huge umami flavor. But it can really work.
Okay.
It can really
all right. So we're
take your cooking to another
one final
level.
thing to note, just totally.
Wait a minute. Should I just there's another headline in the Wall Street Journal that caught my eye.
Go ahead.
Are leather shirts hopelessly smarmy?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Moving on.
So that's not, of course, the Wall Street.
I don't want to be anywhere near anyone.
The Wall Street Journal has a photograph which contributes to that conclusion
on so many levels.
Yes, but they don't. Wall Street Journal doesn't get it right. This is just totally local, but it's just a funny, cute way of life. So word is it that local gas station is going to start selling beer around here. And we say, what the heck is going on? And it turns out there's a gas station which has a little space to the side, which was probably originally for bays that you could repair cars. But instead they brought in some brewing equipment. And now a place called Oddbird Brewery exists.
In Stockton, New Jersey.
Where you can wander in, or as we did on Friday, and instead of getting someone to say, well, gee, we're going to have to replace that muffler, they're saying, okay, we have 4 different kinds of beers. You want to buy the glass or do you want the growler? Out of nowhere, it's gas station beer. And of course, what better development is there than that? Than gas station beer?
Well, there are these little craft breweries popping up all over the place.
Yes, but this is
But who knew there would be one near us?
Well, this little craft brewery, this is like, it doesn't get any smaller than this. Doesn't get any more local than this. And it comes out of like nowhere. It's like a pop-up brewery. And it's a cute thing. They create these growlers by sealing these cans while you're standing there. And it's kind of an amazing thing.
They have a can sealing machine.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Oddbird. So we'll have to see. If they only had the parking, I would see a big success for them. So that's it. There are 2 things we should comment on fast, then we're out of here. Number 1, the Super Bowl is this evening. It's not going to help you to hear my prediction because you can't act on it. But I'm going to make it anyway just to embarrass myself. So, and I will say right now, I see the 49ers winning, and I see them winning relatively easily. So I'm putting myself out there. And the other thing is next week is the Oscars, and here you will hear this before the Oscars, and the question is, we should comment, what's going to be Best Picture? And to me, it comes down to, it will be one of 2. It'll either be 1917 or it'll be Parasite. I mean, we like Jojo Rabbit, but I don't think it's going to win. And I think it's going to be 1917. I'm going to put myself out there. Do you have any view on this, dear?
No, I do not.
Okay. So we just want to be on record. And I think that wraps it up.
All right. Time to go make the pigs in blankets.
For the Super Bowl.
This is Tamsen Granger.
And Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan read the paper. See you on the flip side.